The ascent is a lie, a survivor's account of the elevator to nowhere. You won't find it on any blueprint. No corporate memo acknowledges its existence. But if you're in the right, wrong place at the wrong absolute time, you'll see it. A single, burnished brass elevator door, tucked at the end of a forgotten corridor in a building you thought you knew. They call it the elevator to nowhere. And getting on is the second worst mistake you'll ever make. Getting off is the first. It was my third consecutive 80-hour week at Omnicorp Tower. The air on the 47th floor had taken on the stale, recycled quality of a sealed tomb. My vision blurred, the lines of code on my screen swimming into meaningless glyphs. I was the last one left, or so I thought. The silence was a physical weight, broken only by the hum of servers and the distant, phantom whine of my own exhaustion. That's when I saw it. A corridor I'd passed 100 times, but tonight it seemed longer, darker. At its end, where a fire extinguisher should have been, stood a set of elevator doors. They were different, older, a deep, honeyed brass etched with Art Nouveau flourishes that seemed to writhe in the low light. The call button was a single, milky orb that pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence. Logic screamed at me. This was wrong. The building's elevators were all brushed steel and LED displays. This was an anachronism, a pocket of forgotten architecture. But my body, heavy with fatigue, moved on its own. The promise of a descent, of finally leaving this glass and steel prison, was too potent. I pressed the button. The orb glowed warmer under my finger. With a sound like a satisfied sigh, the door slid open, silent as a grave. The interior was a jewel box of polished wood, more crimson velvet, and that same burnished brass. It was impossibly spacious, smelling of ozone, old books, and a faint, coppery tang. The control panel was a madness. No numbers. Instead, a single, bone-white button was set into the wood, engraved with a simple, downward-pointing arrow. I stepped inside. The doors sealed with a final, chilling thud that felt less like mechanics and more like a vault locking. I was alone. I reached for the button. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Slick. Well, I would. I've got a spectacular lack of self-preservation. But you look fragile. The voice came from the corner. A voice that sounded like gravel and broken glass being stirred in a bucket. I spun around, leaning against the wall, as if he'd been there the entire time, was a demon. He was tall and lanky, clad in a pinstripe suit that was slightly too tight, the fabric a shifting pattern of bruised purple and black. His face was elongated, with sharp cheekbones, and a pair of small, curved horns that peeked from a mess of slicked-back black hair. A thin, forked tail twitched idly against his leg. He grinned, revealing a needle-sharp set of teeth. "What the hell?" I stammered, backing against the far wall. "Close, but not quite," he chuckled, pushing himself off the wall. He gestured with a long-fingered, claw-tipped hand. "I'm Crix. Consider me your interim concierge for the descent. Let me out." Oh, the binding contractual agreement was sealed the moment you crossed that threshold, pal. No refunds. No returns. The ride started. You just haven't felt the drop yet. He sauntered over to the panel and slapped the downward button with a dramatic flourish. Next stop, the end of your sanity. Do try to keep the screaming to a minimum. It gives me a headache. A soft chime echoed through the car, and then we fell. It wasn't the gentle, controlled descent of a normal elevator. This was a plunge. My stomach lurched into my throat, my knees buckling. The lights flickered, and the world outside the doors, what little I could see through the intricate brass grille, became a streaking, impossible blur of colors I had no name for. Crix, meanwhile, leaned casually against the wall, examining his claws. First time. Don't worry, the existential vertigo passes. Or it doesn't. You just get used to the constant feeling of your soul trying to crawl out your ears. The fall seemed to last for an eternity. A sickening, weightless drop that defied physics. Then, with a jarring clunk that shook the entire car, we stopped. The chime sounded again, sweet and innocent. Floor, the rain that falls up. The doors slid open. I stumbled forward, my mind refusing to process the scene. We were in a forest. A petrified forest of colossal, blackened trees, their branches twisting into a canopy against a sky of swirling, bruised purple and green. And it was raining, but the rain was falling up. Fat, heavy drops of silvery water were streaming from puddles on the forest floor, rising into the air, gathering on the undersides of leaves, and hurtling upwards towards the churning sky. The sound was a reverse percussion, a soft plink, 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 as the drops hit the canopy above and vanished. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and ozone. Ah, the updraft glade, Crix said, stepping out and holding a hand over his head, as if shielding himself from the rising downpour. Don't step in a puddle. The splashback is a real bitch. He pointed to a small, rodent-like creature that scurried past. Its fur was soaked, and it moved with a desperate, frantic energy, constantly shaking its head as the rain assaulted it from below. I watched, mesmerized, as a single drop broke from a leaf above and fell down. It hit the forest floor with a sizzle, burning a tiny, blackened crater into the moss. The one that falls the wrong way, Crix noted. Nasty stuff. Reverses your gut flora or your political opinions. It's a real crapshoot. A gust of wind blew, and the upward rain curved, slashing sideways.
To our journey and the bonds we forged, may our path be lit by fire and
shockingly
friendship.
so, and it
To our
carried with
journey and
it
the
a
bonds we
whisper,
forged,
a
may our
faint,
path be lit by
echoing
fire and
sensation
friendship.
of loss. I felt a profound, sudden grief for something I'd never had. The rain, its memories, I whispered, wiping my face. The cold lingered. Crix's grin widened. See, you're getting it. Mostly just forgotten thoughts, abandoned daydreams. The really sad, soggy ones. Come on, the view's better from the edge. He led me to a cliff, overlooking an infinite abyss. The upward rain poured over the edge, a reverse waterfall cascading into the stardusted void below. My brain ached. This was impossible. The doors chimed, a patient summons. We retreated to the elevator. As the doors closed, I saw a figure standing between the trees, a humanoid shape made entirely of the rising water. Its face, a shifting canvas of stolen sorrows. It lifted a hand as if in farewell. The plunge began again, floored the gallery of flesh. The next stop was preceded by a change in atmosphere. The air grew warm, humid, and carried the cloying, metallic scent of blood. The doors opened onto a long, opulent gallery, like something from a Renaissance palace. But the art was alive. The walls were not stone, but a palpitating, raw meat. Veins pulsed just beneath the surface. And the paintings were portraits, their subjects trapped in frames of knotted bone, their faces contorted in silent screams. Their eyes followed us. But the true horror was the blood. A river of it, thick and crimson, flowed not on the floor, but along the walls, defying gravity. It moved in a slow, viscous current, sideways, tracing the contours of the room, oozing from portrait to portrait. As it passed a screaming mouth in one painting, the flow would quicken, as if being sucked in, only to weep from the eyes of the portrait next to it. The Baron's collection, Crix announced, his voice a stage whisper. He's a bit of a sentimentalist and a hemomancer. It's a whole thing. He pointed to a particularly gruesome portrait of a weeping noblewoman. See that one? She cheated at cards. The punishment was fitting. Now her regret fuels the plumbing. He tapped the wall, and the flesh quivered. The whole place is a closed circulatory system, very efficient. Also, a biohazard of the highest order. Don't touch anything. I felt a tug on my trouser leg. Looking down, I saw a small, carpet-like creature made of woven skin and hair, nuzzling against me. It had a single, milky eye in the center of its body. Ah, a rugrat, Crix said. They're mostly harmless, just looking for a dead patch of skin to nibble on. Pest control. I kicked it away, my stomach churning. The blood flow on the wall beside me suddenly swelled, forming a temporary, grotesque face that gurgled something unintelligible before dissolving back into the current. They're trying to communicate, Crix mused. Mostly, it's just complaints about the draft, or requests for a different shade of despair. The interior decorating here is a nightmare. A door at the end of the gallery, made of fused rib bones, began to creak open. A shadow fell across us. Ah, that be the Baron. He doesn't like uninvited guests. Time to go. We scrambled back into the elevator as a long, pale, multi-jointed arm, dripping with the sideways flowing blood, reached out from the bone door. Crix slammed the button. The doors closed just as a hooked claw scraped against the brass, leaving a deep gouge. Rude, Crix sniffed, straightening his suit. That's vintage malevolence, that is, hard to buff out. The elevator plummeted once more. I was shaking, my mind a fractured mosaic of impossible images. Crix, however, seemed invigorated. "You're holding up better than the last guy," he commented. He started composing a sonnet to his own spleen by the second floor. It was derivative. Floor, the silent city of glass and screams. This descent was longer, the blur outside the doors resolving into streaks of silver and white. We stopped with a gentle, almost delicate chime. The doors opened onto a street. A city street, but one made entirely of mirrored glass. The buildings, the pavement, the lampposts, everything was a flawless, reflective surface under a sky of blinding, featureless white. There was no sun, no source for the light, yet it was painfully bright, and it was utterly silent, not just quiet, but a vacuum of sound. Our footsteps made no noise. My breathing, the pounding of my heart, it was all gone, swallowed by the oppressive stillness. I saw my reflection 1,000 times, a terrified man in a rumpled business suit, standing next to a smirking demon. Our images repeated into infinity. Crix opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He rolled his eyes, then mimed writing on his palm. He held it up. "Welcome to Shushvill. Population, U-M-E, and a bunch of echoes." I tried to speak. "What is this place?" My lips moved, but the words died at my lips, absorbed by the silence. He mimed again, this time putting his hands to his ears, and then pointing at the buildings. I didn't understand. He grabbed my shoulder and pointed insistently at one of the mirrored skyscrapers. I looked closer. My reflection was there, but it was off. It was still me, but its eyes were wide with a panic I didn't yet feel. It was a fraction of a second ahead of me. And then I saw it. Deep within the reflection, in the endless corridors of mirrored glass, there were other figures. Faint, ghostly shapes, their mouths open in silent, eternal screams. This city wasn't empty. It was a prison for sound, for screams. Crix tapped the glass. The moment his claw made contact, a torrent of noise exploded, but only in my head. It was a cacophony of 1,000 voices screaming in terror, in rage, in agony, all compressed into a single psychic blast. I cried out, clutching my ears, but the sound was internal, neurological. He pulled his claw back, and the silence crashed down again, even more profound than before. He gave me a sympathetic look and wrote on his palm again. Every scream that was ever suppressed, every truth that was never spoken, they all end up here. It's the universe's junk drawer for audible regret. We walked down the soundless street, our mirrored selves packing us, their expressions slowly becoming more and more unhinged. I saw my own reflection start to weep, then claw at its face. I felt a scream building in my own chest, a pressure with no outlet. I knew if I let it out, it would be stolen, added to the collection, and I would be left in this terrible, pristine silence, forever mute. I grabbed Crix's arm and pointed desperately back at the elevator. He nodded, his usual smirk replaced by a look of genuine understanding. This place got to everyone. Back in the blessed, ambient hum of the elevator car, I slumped against the wall, gasping. The sound of my own breath was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. "Yeah, that one's a mind killer," Crick said, his voice grating and wonderful. Nothing like a trip to the voiceless vault to make you appreciate a good belch. Floor, the archive of lost causes. The next floor was less immediately terrifying, but in many ways more devastating. The doors opened into an infinite library. The air was thick with the dust of ages and the scent of slow, acidic decay. The shelves stretched up into a darkness so complete it felt solid, and out to a horizon that curved in a way that hurt my eyes. But these weren't normal books. They were objects, ideas, memories given physical form. A child's lost teddy bear, covered in cobwebs, sat on a shelf next a glass vial containing the last, fatting ember of a forgotten god. A tarnished wedding ring was displayed beside a scroll that held the complete, unsolvable equation for true happiness. "The archive," Crick said, his voice uncharacteristically soft, "where every abandoned dream, every failed invention, every what-if and if only comes to rest." He pulled a heavy, leather-bound tome from a shelf. The cover was blank. He opened it. Inside, the pages were filled with beautiful, intricate sketches of flying machines, but the ink was fading and the paper was brittle. "Leonardo da Vinci's helicopter," Crix murmured. Not the one he almost built, the one he dreamed of building, the one that could have changed everything. He closed the book, and the cover shimmered, revealing a title, "The Skycutter," a dream deferred. He showed me other shelves. One held jars of light labeled first loves, their glow now dim and intermittent. Another held rows of identical, featureless masks, forgotten promises. A whole wing was dedicated to good intentions, each one a small, polished stone that was cold to the touch. The profound, cosmic sadness of the place was a physical force. It was the weight of potential energy that never became kinetic, of songs never sung, of lives never fully lived. I saw a shelf labeled "The People You Could Have Been," and I had to look away, a tightness in my chest. "Why show me this?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Crix shrugged, but it was a hollow gesture. "Perspective, kid. You think your life is a tragedy. Your failed startup, your broken engagement. It's a drop in this ocean. This is the universe's basement. It's where things are stored because they're too painful to look at, but too meaningful to destroy." He led me to a relatively empty section. "This is new. Pre-2020 sense of optimism. Still cataloging." He picked up a faint, shimmering wisp of something and blew on it. It dissolved into nothing. Fragile stuff. The sheer scale of the loss was incomprehensible. This was a monument to failure, a cemetery for hope. It made my own problems seem insignificant and at the same time terrifyingly preordained. Was my own life destined for a shelf here? As we left, I saw a book forming on an empty shelf. The cover was plain, but as I watched, a title slowly burned itself into the leather. The Man Who Rode the Elevator to Nowhere. My blood ran cold. Floor the jester's court. The plunge that followed was violent, a corkscrewing fall that sent me tumbling to the floor. Cricks laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. Brace yourself. This one's a real riot. The doors opened not onto a landscape, but into the middle of a court. The throne was a mountain of discarded jokes and broken punchlines, and upon it sat a jester. But this was no man. It was a thing of patchwork flesh and mismatched limbs, its face a permanent porcelain mask of mirth, cracked down the middle. Dozens of smaller, identical jesters capered and tumbled around the room, which was itself shifting, the walls and floor tilting at nauseating angles. The Lord of Laughs, Cricks announced, bowing with a flourish. His humor is absolute. One of the smaller jesters cartwheeled past me, and as it did, it let out a peal of laughter. The sound didn't just hit my ears, it hit my mind. And with it came an image forced into my head. My mother, sitting alone in her nursing home room, forgotten on her birthday. The image was accompanied not by sadness, but by a wave of uncontrollable, hysterical laughter. I felt my face split into a wide, painful grin. I started to giggle, then laugh, a harsh, barking sound that I didn't control. Esther on the throne pointed a gloved finger at me, and its own laughter boomed, a sound like shattering glass. With each laugh, the world twisted. Gravity shifted, and I was suddenly standing on the wall, then the ceiling. The other jesters began to perform a comedy. One would slip on a non-existent banana peel, and its neck would snap with an audible crack. The others would roar with laughter. Another would pull a bouquet of flowers from its sleeve, only for the flowers to be screaming with disembodied mouths. It was hellish. It was the horror of forced mirth, the terror of finding something profoundly wrong to be hysterically funny. I was laughing so hard I was crying, but the tears were of shame and horror. My sides ached. I couldn't breathe. Cricks was in his element. He heckled the performers. Oh, the old exploding head routine. Classic. A bit hack, but the execution is flawless. The Lord of Laughs leaned forward, its cracked mask focusing on me. It opened its mouth, and a single, tiny, perfect bubble floated out. It drifted towards me, and in its shimmering surface, I saw my own face, contorted in a scream of laughter as my skin slowly peeled itself back from my skull. The bubble popped against my forehead. The laughter that erupted from me then was torn from my soul. I felt something break inside. All right, that's enough fun for one day, Cricks said, his tone suddenly businesslike. He grabbed my arm, my body still convulsing with unwanted giggles, and dragged me back to the elevator. He's a tough crowd, your lordship. Needs to work on his timing. The doors closed on the cacophony of insane laughter. I collapsed in the corner of the elevator, sobbing and laughing simultaneously, the two sounds indistinguishable. Crix watched me for a moment, then sighed. The court gets everyone eventually. Laughter is the first response to the abyss, and the last. You'll be fine, probably. The descent deepens. The floors began to blur together. A kaleidoscope of existential dread. We visited a floor that was a single, endless desert, where the sand was the ground-up bones of extinct civilizations, and the wind whispered their final, untranslatable words. We stopped in a dimension that was a sentient, malevolent mathematical equation, a place where geometry was a weapon, and irrational numbers physically hunted you. We witnessed a floor that was the inside of a single, gigantic mind, its thoughts forming and collapsing around us like thunderstorms, each one a potential reality that lived and died in an instant. Through it all, Crix was my constant, sarcastic, and terrifying companion. He offered running commentary, critiquing the horrors like a jaded food critic. The existential despair here is a bit overseasoned, don't you think? Needs more nuance. He cracked jokes in the face of soul-annihilating terror. He was my only tether to anything resembling a reality I could understand. And yet, he was a demon, a creature of this very madness. I was losing myself. The man who had stepped into this elevator was gone. His worries about deadlines and promotions now laughably quaint. I was a raw nerve, a collection of terror and awe. I had seen the scaffolding of reality, and it was rotten, insane, and beautiful. Finally, after an eternity of falling, the descent changed. The violent plunging stopped, replaced by a smooth, swift, and purposeful drop. The light in the elevator dimmed to a deep crimson. The air grew cold, so cold I could see my breath. Crix straightened up, his flippant demeanor vanishing. His face grew serious, his sharp features looking almost grim. "We're approaching the end of the line," he said, his voice low and devoid of its usual mocking tone. "The sub-basement, the engine room, the well you'll see." "What is it?" I asked, my voice a whisper. "It's the truth," he said, looking at the doors as if he could see through them. "The one behind all this. The reason the elevator exists. Most souls dissolve long before they get this far. Their minds turn to soup in the jester's court, or get filed away in the archive. You've held on. A testament to human stubbornness. Or stupidity. The line is thin." The elevator began to slow. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the car, a sound that felt like it was tuning my very atoms. "What do I do?" I pleaded, fear gripping me tighter than any horror I'd yet faced. Crix looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that wasn't malice or amusement. It might have been pity. "You look it in the eye," he said softly, "and you accept what you see. There are no jokes down here, pal. No sarcastic quips. Just the naked, unbearable fact of everything." The elevator stopped. There was no chime. The doors simply slid open. The sub-basement, the engine of nonsense. There was nothing to see. Not a void, not a darkness, but an absence of everything, including the concept of thing itself. It was a non-space, a preconceptual reality. And in the center of this nothingness was a single, floating, translucent cube. It was small, perhaps the size of a dice. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, and within it, I could see everything. I saw the updraft glade, the gallery of flesh, the silent city, the archive. I saw my own life to this very moment. I saw every choice I'd ever made, and every choice I hadn't, branching into infinite possibilities. I saw the birth of stars and the heat death of the universe. All of it, every law of physics, every emotion, every dimension, every single note in the symphony of existence was contained within this simple, silent, pulsing cube. This was the source, the first cause, the engine of all reality. And it was broken. A hairline fracture, no bigger than a thread, ran across one of its faces. And from that fracture, everything I had witnessed was leaking. The warped physics, the sideways blood, the silent screams, the forced laughter. It was all a glitch, a cosmic error, a single, tiny flaw in the fundamental code of everything. And we had just been riding the cascade of its malfunction. The horror was not that the universe was malevolent. It was that it was indifferent. And worse, it was faulty. We weren't living in a grand design. We were living in a bug. A beautiful, terrifying, infinitely complex bug. I felt my mind, what was left of it, trying to wrap around this truth. There was no meaning, no purpose, just a beautiful, broken machine. And we were all just patterns in its corrupted data. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the heart of all creation and seeing a crack. Time had no meaning here. Slowly, the cube began to fade. The nothingness receded. I felt a gentle pull. The elevator doors were still open. Crix was standing beside me, his head bowed. He said nothing. I stumbled back into the car, my body moving on autopilot. The doors closed. The ascent was instantaneous. There was no movement, no sense of travel. One moment we were in the sub-basement. The next, the doors were opening onto the familiar, drab corridor of the 47th floor of Omnicorp Tower. The milky call button was dark. The brass doors were now a dull, unremarkable gray. I staggered out. The air was still stale. The hum of the servers was the same. Crix stayed in the elevator. He gave me a long, unreadable look. So, he said, his voice back to its familiar, grating cadence, but softer. Now you know. The joke's on everyone. Try to have a nice life, or whatever pathetic facsimile of one you can manage. The doors began to close. Wait, I croaked. What happens now? His sharp-toothed grin returned, but it was weary. Now you live with it. You know the secret. That the universe is a beautiful, meaningless accident running on faulty hardware. Most people go mad. Some become poets. A few just get really into stamp collecting. I suggest the latter. It's the most sane response. The doors shut with a definitive click, I stood alone in the corridor. I looked at my hands. They seemed unreal. The world seemed like a thin veneer, a desperate consensus hallucination built over a core of glorious, terrifying nonsense. I never saw the elevator again. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't stand the confines of the office, the petty concerns, the illusion of order.
To our journey and the bonds
That
we
was
forged,
5 years ago.
may our path be lit by
I
fire
write
and
this
friendship.
now from a small,
To our
quiet
journey
room.
and the bonds we forged,
I have a
may our
cat.
path be lit by fire
I
and
tend a
friendship.
small garden, and I collect stamps. I have one of the most comprehensive collections of pre-1940s Antarctic issues in the world. It's a harmless passion. It requires immense focus, attention to tiny, meaningless details. It creates order out of chaos. When I'm sorting my perforations or studying a watermark, I can almost forget. I can almost believe that the world is solid, that rules matter, that things make sense. But sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, in the silence between heartbeats, I see it. The cube, the crack, and I feel the phantom sensation of a drop that has no end. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that somewhere, a brass elevator door is sliding open for someone else. And a demon with a sharp suit and a sharper tongue is offering a smile and a one-way ticket down. The ascent was the lie. The descent is the only truth, and it goes on forever.